This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Daniel O'Brien, K-State grain economist, begins today's show commenting on the ups and downs in the market, and he discusses transportation and exports. Keeping the show rolling is John Holman, K-State cropping systems and forage agronomist, and Augustine Obour, K-State soil scientist, as they converse about how producers can help protect their land and soil after a wildfire. K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond ends today's show as he notes the recent cold and warm temperatures and lack of moisture in the state. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with the grain market update from K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien. Daniel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Shelby.
Daniel, what are we seeing in futures?
Lots of volatility. We've had issues with the energy markets that seemingly have bled over into the commodity markets. Corn closed on Thursday, the 19th of March. The May contract at $4.70, but that contract in the last bit of time has been as high as up into 470s or so. That's within the last week, as low as about 450, and again closed at 469 3/4 to 470, depending on which source you look at. So a lot of volatility, ups and downs. It's interesting to look at some of the technical indicators, such as relative strength indices, still, with all that's been happening, still shows in the positive side of the momentum range in the market. So ups and downs, yet still on a positive side. Looking at the rate of change over the last 10 days or so, it's still a positive, it's like 3.6%. So even with all this up and down, you've got that happening. And a lot of that, of course, comes out of as we mentioned, the oil market, with things happening in the Middle East, again, shooting conflicts, all of that going on. It's bled over and affected us in the grains. Soybeans, for some of the same reasons, also have come in strong with a lot of strong volatility. Closed yesterday in the May contract around 1168.5, had been as high as almost 1230 or so within the last week. Closed down as low as about 1150, and again closed yesterday about 1169. So just lots of volatility. Again, you've got some issues coming into play there from South America, with their exports being competitive with ours, and we'll talk about that in a minute in terms of what's happening on the movement side. For wheat, seen a fair amount of wheat volatility too. Closed yesterday at $6.30, and if you look back about a week or so, that's markedly higher than where we had been. So probably some questions with regard to wheat production prospects. We've had fires to the north and south of Kansas. Some those fires again have come in southern Kansas. Worries, at least out here in western Kansas, about cold temperatures and how they may have affected the crops. So generally, a fair amount of volatility. Had been up as high within the last 2 weeks at about $6.50 for the May contract, as low as about $6, and again trading at about $6.30. This type of volatility, I think, as we were sitting about a month ago, we were expecting, well, we'll get into spring, there'll be some things that could cause the markets to move. But I think it's fair to say we have more volatility. On the upside, more selling opportunities for old crop of these grains, and probably some new crop selling opportunities too, that are all in hand. So quite a time, lots of volatility. The underlying factors are interesting to try to tease out. And I would say when you look at the cash prices, again, following similar trends, and you look at the best new crop corn prices right now out into fall 2026. Highest prices actually in Garden City about $485, $470 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, southeast part of the state. Topeka $455, $450, Salina $453 in Colby. So really, really pretty strong prices. We do have coming up at the end of this month the USDA grain stocks and prospective plantings reports. There was an independent company that came out within the last week and indicated numbers even lower for corn acres than had been projected at the USDA Outlook Conference. So that's supportive for new crop corn. I would say for current bids, old crop bids, $4.40 a Garden City, the highest price actually, again, one independent unit out there, about $4.60, and others ranging from $4.16 in Colby area, $4.25 Hutchinson, $4.40 again Garden, $4.35 Topeka, $4.20 in Salina. So as we watch the corn market, lots going on. Sorghum market, as you look at that, the highest price actually $4.15 in Hutchinson. And again, that's one or two of the main terminals there that are export oriented. So interesting to watch. It's highest soybean bid in the state. 1108 at Topeka, 1104 Salina, 11, and also in Hutchinson, 1099 in the Pittsburgh area, and out to the west more like 1050, 1060, something like that. Just interesting to watch. And for wheat prices, with the wheat harvest around the corner, you've got current wheat prices with the highs of 593, all the same in Salina, Topeka, and Hutchinson areas. So that's closer to 6 than to 5. And for a while, we were wondering if we'd ever be saying that. New crop bids, if someone is in a position where they feel confident going with new crop bids, crop insurance coverage, all of that, all in place. The highest new crop bids are 618 again in the Salina, Topeka, Hutchinson area, and more like a 560, 570 thereabouts in Colby and Garden City and Pittsburgh. So lots happening right now. We'll see what happens as far as the next government report coming on. Again, it's on the last day of this month in March, and the stocks report will give us more information about usage, at least stocks usage for sure. Some insight into what any changes that eventually might happen in the size of in the USDA's estimates of the 2025 crops. So we'll see. But again, probably the biggest number that'll come out for that will be the projection of acreage. So there's the possibility of quite a bit of market volatility on that day, especially if the corn and soybean acreage numbers vary quite a bit from what the market's expecting. So just interesting stuff to watch, and volatility means we can go either way. So for people on the selling side that still have old crop grain, I think you'd want to be cautious, wary, and paying attention coming into that day and right afterwards with regard to what those reports might show on the acreage and ultimately the production side.
And at the mention of reports, I'm wanting to also talk a little bit about transportation, and what did you see in a recent report for that?
You know, the USDA each week at an Ag Marketing Service site puts out a U.S. grain transportation report. And this week it had some key numbers in it that, on the one hand, we're looking at continued strong U.S. corn exports here for the week ending March the 12th, still 69 million bushels of U.S. corn actually being shipped during the week of, that'd be million bushels, pardon me, the week ending March the 12th. 1.7 billion for this marketing year, and in terms of what's been shipped and bought ahead, about 2.6 billion out of a forecast about 3.3. We've got 23 weeks left in the marketing year, so all those are at least positive, if not bullish, numbers on the corn market. And when you go to this ag transportation report and see what that's indicating, you see indications of strong barge movement, strong rail movement, all happening at this time. A good amount of movement going down the river system of the United States, again, through the Mississippi, Missouri river system. We call it basically the Mississippi River system. So you got strong barge movement, strong rail movement, and again, the prices are representing that to some degree. So that's been positive. And grain sorghum, again, if you're talking about the two states most involved in grain sorghum production in the United States, it'd be Kansas and Texas. Oklahoma also right in the middle of all that, literally and figuratively. For the week ending March the 12th, we had 7.85 million bushels shipped, and we need a pace of about 5.3 to meet the USDA's for the rest of this marketing year, final 23 weeks to meet the USDA's projection of 225 million. So again, that's at least I would think the upfront number, the most recent week, is actually a bullish figure, and the prospects for the rest of the year, given what's bought ahead, really still pretty positive. So we'll see where that goes. Wheat exports, they are moderating to some degree, although the hard red numbers are still running pretty decent, about on pace, just slightly below where the USDA would need what we need to have to meet the USDA's projection for all for hard red winter wheat, about 320 million. So really, for us in Kansas, not too bad of a signal there. And for soybeans, I think about 33 million bushels, which in a way is actually surprising because we're expecting this flood of South American soybeans, but yet the pace for the U.S. so far for beans is still holding up. So that's all positive. On the transportation side, we have seen U.S. diesel prices respond to what has been the run up in oil prices. Again, you can look at crude oil WTI at $96 per barrel. For Brent crude oil, $108 per barrel. You have these different markets that represent different cost structures in those markets. So with that, you're showing an impact on both diesel fuel and if someone's interested in seeing what the USDA and the government thinks about fertilizer prices, there's a nice article in the transportation report talking about how higher energy prices overall are impacting the outlook for fertilizer. And again, we've already been fertilizing this open winter that we've had for a good while, and here's we come into the final stretch when we get into planting and still have some fertilizing going on. It's going to be really something to watch, how the dynamics of the fertilizer market as it responds to what's happening in the energy market.
Daniel, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby. Take care.
That was K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing cropland, soil, and nutrient impacts after wildfire. And to talk about this, we're joined by K-State Cropping Systems and Forage Agronomist John Holman and K-State Soil Scientist Augustine Obour. John, Augustine, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having us.
Shelley, always a pleasure.
As we have unfortunately seen more wildfires in the Midwest, wanting to talk through this, and first, what are some nutrient considerations after a wildfire?
Crop residue does not only protect the soil, they also help in nutrient cycling. So once the crop residue burns, most of the nitrogen and even sulfur is all gone. About 50 to 60% of it is gone through the burning. And then you also will have maybe some phosphorus, but you can lose some of the phosphorus as well. About 25 to 30% of that also will be lost. And then just following the burning, and if you don't get any precipitation to kind of hold the soil, there can be a lot of erosion happening. So you may lose most of the nutrients as well. So in crop fields, it will take a while for you to get back to normal in terms of nutrient cycling in that kind of situation. So one of the things that we recommend is possibly going there to take soil samples and test it and know what you have in the soil, especially if you want to go back to growing the crop.
And another thing important for us to consider after wildfires, in our croplands and just in our rangeland, erosion, and what's one of the first options ideally that would happen?
You know, if we had good moisture, what we would try to do is get some cover there to replace what's been burned. So, you know, I mean, we are coming into the growing season, so, you know, thankfully we have some options there to grow a crop, whether that be a grain crop or a cover crop. And for a large part of the state, western part of the state, we're dry currently, and the outlook doesn't look very optimistic. But as we all know, conditions can change rapidly in Kansas. So, you know, hopefully we'll get some moisture, or folks have some moisture to get a crop established. But our ideal situation would be getting a crop growing there and get some ground cover back on that soil to protect that soil.
Yeah, like John said, if we have some moisture growing a cover crop right now, would have been an ideal situation, planting a cover crop, get something established. And in that situation, what we would recommend is planting a cool season cover crop like oat or triticale, or even you can plant a mixture, having the cool season cover crop plus some sorghum sudan or millets in it, because right now, with the temperatures coming, the soil temperatures heating up, it could emerge. And then you can have the cool season cover crop growing. You have a warm season cover crop that will emerge. And then you can have more biomass produced that way. Then you can have a lot of residue returned back to the soil as well.
How much residue is needed to hopefully reduce the concern of erosion?
Between Augustine and I, we've, got several decades of work in this area. And with me being further west than him, I'm more challenged to grow sufficient crop residue than as you move east in the state. So we've got some information on how much residue is needed to grow from both to see the positive benefits of that residue, suppress weeds, and then also economically, in our work with cover crops, really the only way for it to really cash flow is to grow that as a forage crop. Now, if you're in a situation though where you lost all your residue due to fire, that changes the economics because your objective may be just to get some ground cover out there to keep that soil from blowing, or if we do get some big summer rainfall events that can cause a lot of erosion of the soil by heavy precipitation events as well. So soil water erosion. But roughly, to answer your question, at least 2,000 pounds is what's needed to do that, which a spring cover like oats or triticale can accomplish that in most years. A summer crop is going to produce 3 times the biomass that a spring would be. So, we're sitting here right now. If a grower's gonna make that determination, I mean, now is the time to plant a spring if they've got the moisture to work with. But if they don't, that decision whether to plant a spring or summer is, they're going to have that option to plant a summer here in the near future as well. So if conditions are extremely dry and outlook is dry, they might think about holding off and planting a summer crop just to get more biomass and ground cover.
In terms of the summer crop, I think a forage crop probably will be a better fit if you have less residue versus a grain crop. And the forage crop like sorghum sudan, forage sorghum, you plant it at a very narrow row spacing, so that will help cover the ground very quickly. And since it also have very narrow rows, the chances of you having more residue out there will be very high. And in most years, you can produce about 6,000 pounds dry matter. So like John mentioned, you can graze that off or even hay it and still have some regrowth to achieve the 2,000 pounds per acre dry matter that we're talking about. Then the other issue is aside the residue biomass, you also want to consider the residue height. The height of the residue will be very important to help in terms of wind erosion, protecting the soil against wind erosion.
And if the ideal of getting something planted in the ground isn't possible, is tillage maybe another option?
It is, but maybe one step before going to that a producer could consider is spreading some manure on the soil if they can access manure, and that manure will also help prevent soil erosion, especially some of the hilltops and things of that nature. And then you're going to get the fertilizer benefit of that manure. But yes, emergency tillage is also an option, but emergency tillage, if you're in that situation, what we're trying to do there is bring up clods from the deeper in the soil and up to the soil surface and make that soil surface less smooth and more and to help reduce that wind velocity on hitting the soil surface. But that also hopefully can conditions improve and we start getting some rain, but that requires a little bit of subsoil moisture to bring those clods up. And but definitely, I mean, emergency tillage is a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, and then like John mentioned, you want to make sure also that you are tailing perpendicular to the direction of the wind as well. So if you tail in the direction of the wind, then the chances of the soil blowing is even also going to be greater. So tailing right is very important, and also the tillage implement. In this case, like John mentioned, you want to have some cloth. So anything like a sweep plow may not be ideal for that situation because you pulverize the soil and the chances of having more erosion will be bigger.
Does the concern of erosion differ depending on what type of soil it is?
The management will change. So if we think about sandy soil, I mean, they're quite often historically we've had challenges of soil erosion in sandy soils, or it can be highly susceptible to erosion, especially if they don't have ground cover. So producers have used listers before to try and help roughen that soil surface to try and prevent wind erosion. So I would say our sandy soils with lack of residue are going to be maybe one of the more highly susceptible soils. Although, our highly silt loam soils too, that silt is also extremely susceptible to wind erosion. Also, if it is lacking any soil cover. So, and these soils also have differences in water holding capacity and maybe the amount of definitely the clods that we can get from the type of implement that we use. So, yeah, soil type does come into play in how we try to manage these soils.
To add to what John just said, the soil type is important. It helps in holding water. Adequate moisture in the soil will also be very important because if it's too dry, the claws are not going. You will not be able to make very good claws with your tillage. So in that case, you may want to till a little bit deeper, where to get into moisture to be able to bring the claws to the surface. But clay loam soils and silt loam soils will do a little bit better forming claws than sandy soils, and even just silt clays sometimes it may break apart a little bit easier than when you do have some clay loam soils.
That was K-State soil scientist Augustine Obour and K-State cropping systems and forage agronomist John Holman. I will link the e-update article on this topic in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, as we look at this past week, we saw a lot of different temperatures and kind of a lack of moisture, at least from my perspective. And is that something we saw across the state?
Yeah, we had some pretty impressive cold air that moved through early this week. It got really cold. And when we looked at the forecast too, the forecasts were a little overdone. It got much colder than expected. We actually had negatives. We had a -1 in Cheyenne County, northwest Kansas. But almost all the states saw, except for far south central, saw at least temperatures down into the 10-degree range to even single digits. It was really cold. And that's obviously a big red flag when we look at how far along wheat has been and, overall green up. Perennial flowers are coming up and some of the trees are budding out. And so everything got hit pretty hard by really cold. And it wasn't cold for just an hour or two. We had some places that were below 12 degrees for 5, 6, 8 hours. And that's usually a threshold this time of year for injury for early season growth. And so definitely some setbacks there, but then we rebounded. Boy, we rebound really quickly. Temperatures are already in the 80s and even 90s in portions of southwest Kansas. And, all that big temperature fluctuation is a result of the really dry air mass in place. We've got humidities. Even when we were cold, we had humidities down into the 20% range. And of course, when we warm temperatures up as much as we have this week, we see still persistent dry conditions and humidity's down to the single digits. And when we think of going into spring, we think of entering our spring rainy season, and we average more and more precipitation each week. And every week we go without moisture now, we build deficits, and we can build deficits really quickly. In fact, just in eastern Kansas, we should see weekly average precipitation anywhere around an inch to 3/4 of an inch in the far southeast. Central Kansas should be more around that half-inch mark. And then you get further west, they average a little bit less. So these dry conditions are kind of feeling more dry, especially as you get this heat. And we saw a drought monitor expand. We're now at 56% of the state, at least in some sort of drought category, with a pretty substantial expansion northward from southern Kansas into central Kansas in the southwest. And now we added more D1 too. That's moderate drought now, with at least 23% of the state in moderate drought, mainly focused in southeast Kansas and far northwest Kansas. And that's a pretty big increase for this time of year. And we need some moisture and some capacity. We did have a little bit of snow over the weekend, but it wasn't enough to actually count towards the drought monitor or any precipitation deficits we've developed over the last several weeks.
As we do look ahead, are we going to see some moisture?
Yeah, well, we have got a very warm start to the weekend. Another impressive cold front comes through Sunday morning, and that's going to result in an uptick in winds and fire danger first and foremost. And that's going to probably be the reoccurring theme as we go through the remainder of the month. No moisture forecasted. Maybe early April, we start to see hints of a pattern change as more of that upward lift in the Madden-Julian oscillation starts to move eastward into the United States. That's still pretty far off. A lot of things can change between now and then. And I'm not overly confident in widespread precipitation. Again, it would focus kind of the far southeast. So I think very likely that most of the state does not have any more moisture to end the month of March. It's going to end up being one of the drier months of March we've seen in Kansas in some time. Temperatures are going to stay above normal. And even after that big cold front on Sunday, I mean, we're going to still see temperatures running anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees above normal. And then we go right back up into the 80s next week before another strong front with more gusty winds. And so we're drying the vegetation out. Folks that are doing prescribed burning, getting good consumption on their prescribed burns, but then they're also seeing much more aggressive fire behavior than expected. And then keeping it within the prescribed burn boundaries is going to be more difficult because areas of timber are going to carry fire very efficiently. And with that cold, that frost, potential frost injury or frost kill in the wheat means that we're going to start to see fire burning in green grass too. So definitely a dry landscape and concerns of fire weather through the end of the month.
Chip, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's what we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.